A quick word to parents. This week's content deals with death and what happens to us after death according to Catholic teaching. Although I try to deal with these topics in a kid-friendly way, if you have any hesitations, I encourage you to listen to the episodes before turning them on for your family. You're listening to
Catholic Sprouts,
the daily podcast for Catholic kids that strives to plant seeds of faith. Hey there, Sprouts. Today is Friday, November 2nd, 2018. It is also the feast day of All Souls. And tomorrow is another great feast day, the feast day of St. Martin de Porres. This week on the Catholic Sprouts podcast, we have been talking about death and what happens to us after we die. We've talked about the requirements for gaining eternal life with Jesus Christ in heaven. We've talked about the reality of hell and what we will be judged on once we die. We've also talked about heaven, where all of the saints are residing and singing the praises of God forever. And yesterday, we talked about purgatory and how through God's mercy, there is a place for us to go if we need a little more purification after we die, so that we are ready to stand in the presence of God. Today, we are going to look at the amazing example of St. Martin de Porres to understand what true holiness is. Now, St. Martin de Porres, who was a poor man of mixed race who lived in the 1500s in Peru, he was one of those extraordinarily holy people. Many healing miracles were attributed to him. It is said that he would levitate while he prayed, that he could walk through locked doors. So many amazing things have been attributed to Martin de Porres. We might not, probably won't, achieve these amazing things. But what I want you to know as I talk through his biography is that Martin de Porres was able to do these things because he was so united with Jesus Christ. In fact, it's more so that Jesus Christ was able to use him to do these amazing miracles because Martin de Porres gave Jesus Christ everything. St. Martin de Porres was from Peru and he lived in the 1500s. His father was a Spanish landowner and his mother was a freed slave. Now, they weren't married, so Martin de Porres was born into shame. And at this time, people of mixed race, since he was half African and half Spanish, they were looked down on very much. And he was discriminated against and treated very poorly. He grew up very, very poor. He did get sent off by his mother to be trained as a barber. And at this time, a barber did the work of not only cutting hair, but also medical work of healing and even surgery. So he did have that training. However, he wanted to go on and be in a religious order. But at this time, if you were of mixed race, you couldn't do that. You couldn't join an order. So he finally convinced an order of Dominicans to take him in as a servant. And he worked for many years as a servant. However, through those years of working as a servant, the brothers in this monastery saw just how holy this young man was, how he cared so deeply for the poor, how he did the lowest, most disgusting work without ever complaining, and how he deeply, deeply loved the Blessed Sacrament. And so eventually, after many, many years, he was allowed to officially take his vows and become a lay member of the order, even though he still suffered a lot of discrimination and hate, even from those that belonged to the community. Now, while Martin de Porres was with this order of Dominicans, he begged for all of his needs. He performed many miracles. He was able to feed hundreds of poor people every day through ways people didn't really understand. If he was multiplying loaves or what, it was miraculous. He also continued to work as a barber and a doctor. And at one point, an epidemic broke out in Peru, and there were many, many sick people. But Martin de Porres unfailingly healed them, even when they were locked away in seclusion, and he was reported to walk through locked doors to help them. But the real power of St. Martin de Porres came from his compassion for other people. He always saw the needs of others and never did any of his miracles to glorify himself. A story was told by one of his brothers that one day when Martin de Porres was coming back to the community, he saw a beggar who was covered in sores and who was filthy. Without thinking twice, St. Martin de Porres picked him up and brought this filthy, sick man and laid him in his own bed. Another brother criticized Martin de Porres, and Martin de Porres said in return, "Compassion, my dear brother, is preferable to cleanliness." And so this is the example of St. Martin de Porres. He never complained, he never became prideful, and he never did any of these things for himself. All of his miracles were for other people. If you remember from the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, "Welcome, my good and faithful servants, to those that did his work on earth, that saw him in the person that was hungry and sick and needed clothing and loved that person." And so, Sprouts, here is your challenge today. I want you to pray to St. Martin de Porres that you can embrace this love of other people, that you can see Christ in them, that you can serve them, and that through that you can truly serve Jesus Christ. That's it for Catholic Sprouts today. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, continue to grow in your faith and truly sprout into the beautiful creation that God intended you to be. One final word to the grown-ups. Thank you so much for listening to the Catholic Sprouts podcast. I would like to invite you to join a special Facebook group just for those that listen to the Catholic Sprouts podcast. We will use this group to connect, to share resources around that week's theme, and simply celebrate raising future saints. To find the direct link to the Facebook group, simply check the notes for this podcast episode.